Yeah, so Reiki is a chi path. Both of these are light touch therapies, and that's, from the client's perspective, they almost feel exactly the same. And from the client's perspective, a lot of times what happens is you come in, I put my hands on you, you enter rather quickly, actually, this very relaxed, sort of beautiful state where I kind of just like to think of it as, the place where things can happen, both inside and outside. And we always talk about sort of unlocking the body's internal healing mechanisms. And that can be emotional, that can be physical, that can be, dealing with the effect of some difficult experience in the past, because all of that kind of lives in the body. Mm-hmm. And so, Reiki is actually related to a really ancient form of hand healing, is what it was called, which existed not only in Japan but kind of all over the place, thousands of years, and then various forms of it got lost and it was rediscovered at the beginning of the 20th century. But it really sort of owes its roots to that, what used to be called laying on hands, where it sounds mysterious, but it's supposed to be working with the universal life force energy. I often think of as I said, it's a chi path, like Tai Chi and acupuncture. Mm-hmm. I often think of chi almost as bioelectrics, which is kind of simplistic, but does, a lot of people are aware of it as the idea of life force, where there's something about being alive that's a little bit different than being a rock. And, so what is that thing and how do you work with it? And, in a lot of societies, there's actually the conception of a force or some sort of thing that you can interact with. And that's a hard idea for a lot of Westerners to accept. But it's one of those places where if you make the jump to, rather than figuring out how you're going to get there, but if you make the jump to where you're actually working with this stuff, all kinds of things happen. And so then you're back in the empirical world of saying, okay, well, if this happens when I do this, then maybe I should make the assumption that I'm actually, doing something regardless of whether or not I understand exactly everything about it. And I have my own ideas about specifically what's happening, which we can get into at some other point. One of the interesting things about energy or bioelectrics is it seems to act directly on the connective tissue. The connective tissue of the body surrounds pretty much everything. It surrounds all the blood vessels and the nerves and all the organs and goes into your brain. And it's what's called piezoelectric, which means that changes in pressure actually cause changes in the way that charge is conducted through the connective tissue. And so that's one of the ways that you can communicate with different parts of the body by using Reiki is, through some of these electrical changes that happen in the connective tissue. And that relates really well to craniosacral therapy, because craniosacral therapy is often aimed at easing restrictions in the connective tissue, particularly that around the brain and spinal cord. So, and as craniosacral therapy has matured, it started to bring in different techniques from other fields, including Reiki and including some other, light touch areas where, they'll actually talk about using energy in craniosacral therapy. But craniosacral therapy is more biomechanically oriented. It's an offshoot of osteopathy, and the guy who originated it was an osteopath. He was also a jazz musician, though, and he loved to just, pull things together and, sort of improvise on them and, get different variations. And so that's one of the kind of most interesting things about craniosacral therapy is how it manages to work really well with some of these other modalities, and how it's got a really playful attitude towards it. One of the other things there's two other things I think that's particularly important about both these kinds of therapy. One is that they're both holistic, and holistic therapies, which include a lot of the traditional Chinese medicine therapies in general, tend to have the idea, first of all, that it's the individual that's important. It's not the symptoms. So you always deal specifically with the person that's on your table at that moment. You don't deal with, well, this is what somebody else had and this is what somebody else had. You can have the same symptoms in different people and they can be completely different. They can mean different things and they can have different ways that you would act with them. It also means that the emotional body, the emotional world, the physical world, the world of experience, and for a lot of people the spiritual world, I'm a little less in that place than some, but they're all interconnected and you cannot separate them. It doesn't even make any sense. So that means that when you're working on somebody, maybe emotions come up, and those emotions are just as important to what's going on as any sort of physical symptom that might be happening. The other thing about both these therapies that's pretty crucial is kind of a basic attitude towards really respecting the person that you're working with, to know what they need, and to even if they can't necessarily verbalize it, it's never me telling you what you need. It's always maybe your body starts to say what it needs, and we ask it, do you feel that you need such and such and such and such. And it's also a matter of sort of meeting somebody where they are, and whatever it is, you don't need to have a particular belief system. You don't need to have me telling you what to do. None of those things are important. It's all about who you are right now in this space at this time. And kind of along those lines, there's this aspect of I'm not the healer. Even though I may call myself a healer, or I may not, depending on my mood, it's really the client who is doing the healing. And what I'm doing is sort of facilitating, I'm holding the space, I'm opening up possibilities, I'm engaging in a conversation, but I am not doing anything to you in that sense. And it sounds like that would not be necessarily as significant a thing as it actually is, but it makes all the difference, because what that really does is it allows somebody to connect with what is their internal healing mechanisms, not what I think you should be doing or what I think you need. And that's why it has power, because otherwise it just wouldn't.